At exactly 12:47 a.m., Kang Jae-hyun walked through the silent entrance of his mansion expecting to find darkness and sleep. Instead, he heard someone crying. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the enormous marble walls, but he recognized it immediately. His wife. Jae-hyun stopped walking. For 3 years, he had built his life around silence. Silence meant control. Silence meant nobody could read his thoughts. Silence meant nobody could discover the weakness hidden beneath the ruthless reputation that made businessmen lower their voices whenever he entered a room. But that night, the sound coming from the kitchen disturbed something inside him. He followed it. When he reached the doorway, he froze. His wife, Soraya, was sitting on the cold kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet. Her beautiful face was wet with tears. One hand covered her mouth as she tried desperately to keep herself quiet, and in her other hand was a small white envelope. The moment she noticed him, she quickly tried to hide it behind her. Jae-hyun stared at her for several seconds. Then, for the first time since they had married, he walked toward his wife without anger in his eyes. He slowly lowered himself in front of her. "Why are you crying?" Those 5 words were simple, but Soraya looked at him as if he had finally opened a door she had been standing outside for years. If you love Korean billionaire romance and mafia love stories like this, subscribe now to @Physial_Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Soraya had never imagined that her marriage would look like this. 3 years earlier, she had entered the enormous Kang mansion carrying one small suitcase and a heart full of uncertainty. She was a beautiful African woman with warm brown skin, gentle eyes, and a quiet strength that people often mistook for weakness. She had never been interested in wealth. She had worked hard for everything she had, first studying abroad and later building a modest career as a private language tutor and translator. Then she met Jae-hyun. He was the opposite of everything she knew. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, and intimidating even when he said nothing. He owned one of the most powerful corporate empires in Seoul. Behind the polished image of Kang Holdings was another world. A world of underground deals, powerful families, dangerous alliances, and men who obeyed Jae-hyun without asking questions. People called him the ghost of Seoul because nobody knew what he was thinking until it was too late. Yet Soraya had discovered something the rest of the world never saw. He was lonely. Their marriage had begun unexpectedly. Jae-hyun had proposed after only a few months of knowing her, but he never explained why. Soraya had accepted because she believed there was something genuine beneath his cold exterior. But after their wedding, she quickly learned that loving Jae-hyun would not be easy. He left before sunrise and returned long after midnight. He rarely spoke about his feelings. He never explained where he went. And whenever Soraya tried to ask him about his life, he gently shut the conversation down. Still, he never mistreated her. He made sure she had everything she needed. He remembered the tea she liked. He noticed when she was tired. He secretly instructed the household staff to prepare her favorite meals whenever she had a difficult day. But he did all of it from a distance, as though getting too close to his own wife frightened him. Soraya had spent 3 years wondering why. And then, one quiet evening, everything began to change. It started with a letter. She had been cleaning the study while Jae-hyun was away when she discovered an old envelope hidden inside one of his locked drawers. She had not opened it. She would never betray his privacy like that. But before she could leave the room, the drawer suddenly opened by itself. Inside was a photograph. Jae-hyun stood beside a young woman. The woman was smiling. And beneath the photograph was a handwritten note. Soraya did not read it. She did not need to. The look on Jae-hyun's face in that photograph was enough. It was the softest expression she had ever seen on him, an expression he had never given her. That discovery quietly broke something inside her. But what she didn't know was that the photograph was not the secret she feared. The following morning, Jae-hyun noticed that Soraya was different. She prepared breakfast without speaking. She smiled when he entered the room, but the smile never reached her eyes. He watched her carefully. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but years of emotional restraint stopped him. Instead, he simply told her he would be home early that evening. Soraya looked surprised. She nodded. But that evening, Jae-hyun never came home. Hours passed. Then midnight arrived. Soraya sat alone at the kitchen table with the white envelope in front of her. Inside was something she had been terrified to tell him. Something that had nothing to do with another woman. Something that could change their entire marriage. She opened the envelope again. Her hands trembled. A single document stared back at her. Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed the paper against her chest and quietly broke down. She had promised herself she would tell Jae-hyun the truth. But now that the moment had arrived, she was terrified. What she didn't know was that Jae-hyun had already returned home, and he had heard every sound. Now, standing in front of her on the kitchen floor, he reached toward the envelope. Soraya pulled it away. "Please," she whispered. Jae-hyun stopped. Something in her voice made his expression change. For once, he did not demand an answer. He simply sat beside her on the cold floor. Then he noticed something that made his heart tighten. Her wedding ring was wet with tears. He looked at her trembling hands. Then he quietly asked her again why she was crying. Soraya looked into the eyes of the most feared man in Seoul. And after 3 years of hiding her pain, she finally decided she could no longer carry the secret alone. She slowly placed the envelope between them. But before she could open it, Jae-hyun saw the name written across the front. His own name. His face changed immediately, because beneath his name was another word. Medical. And suddenly, the woman he had spent 3 years protecting from the world was the one person he realized he might have failed to protect from pain. But what happens next changes everything. Jae-hyun stared at the envelope as though the single word written across it had shaken the foundation beneath him. Medical. For a man who had faced powerful enemies without blinking, the sight of that envelope terrified him in a way he could not explain. Soraya lowered her eyes. She could feel his gaze on her, but she could not bring herself to look at him. For 3 years, she had convinced herself that she could survive anything alone. She had survived the loneliness of being married to a man who rarely spoke about his emotions. She had survived the whispers of people who believed she had married Jae-hyun for his money. She had even survived the moments when she wondered whether he truly loved her. But she had never learned how to survive the possibility of losing him. Jae-hyun slowly reached for the envelope. This time, Soraya did not stop him. He opened it. Inside was a medical report. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. For several seconds, the kitchen became completely silent. Soraya watched his expression carefully. She expected anger. She expected disappointment. Instead, she saw something she had never seen before. Fear. Jae-hyun looked back at her. He asked whether she had known about this for long. Soraya nodded. She explained that she had discovered the problem several weeks earlier during a routine medical examination. The doctors had found something that required further treatment. It was not immediately life-threatening, but it was serious enough that she would need a procedure and months of careful recovery. The doctors had told her that she had every reason to hope for a full recovery. But there was another problem. Soraya had been afraid to tell him. Jae-hyun asked why. She finally looked at him. Because you already have enough problems. The words were simple, but they struck him harder than any accusation. Soraya explained that she knew what his life was like. Every day, people came to him with business problems, family disputes, corporate threats, and secrets. She had watched him carry the weight of an entire empire without ever complaining. She did not want to become another burden. Jae-hyun stared at her. He could not understand how his own wife had convinced herself that her suffering was something she needed to hide from him. Then she told him something that hurt even more. She had tried to talk to him several times, but every time she approached him, he was busy. Sometimes he was on the phone. Sometimes he was leaving for a meeting. Sometimes he simply looked exhausted. So she kept waiting. And waiting slowly became silence. Jae-hyun lowered his head. For the first time, he understood that his silence had been hurting the woman he loved. He had always believed that providing protection was enough. A secure home. Financial security. A private doctor. A life without fear. But Soraya had never asked for those things. She had wanted him. Not his money. Not his protection. Him. Jae-hyun reached for her hand. She almost pulled away out of habit. Then she stopped. His fingers closed gently around hers. He told her that she was never a burden. Soraya began crying again. But this time, she did not hide her tears. She leaned toward him, and Jae-hyun pulled her into his arms. The embrace was quiet. There was no dramatic promise, no grand declaration. Just two people sitting on a kitchen floor in the middle of the night, finally allowing themselves to admit that they had been hurting each other without realizing it. But something still bothered Jae-hyun. He asked why the report had been addressed to him. Soraya hesitated. Then she explained that the specialist had requested a consultation with him because the treatment required his authorization and support. Jae-hyun immediately realized how much she had been handling alone. He felt ashamed. The woman beside him had been frightened for weeks while he had been worrying about board meetings and business disputes. He gently touched her face. He told her that from that moment forward, she would not face another appointment alone. Soraya looked at him with disbelief. She had heard promises before, but something about his voice was different. This was not the cold voice of the man who controlled an empire. This was the voice of her husband. The next morning, everything changed. Jae-hyun canceled every meeting. His executives were stunned. He had never canceled an entire day of business without an emergency. But this time, he did not care what anyone thought. He personally drove Soraya to the hospital. She sat quietly beside him, watching the city pass through the window. At one point, she asked whether he was sure he did not have somewhere more important to be. Jae-hyun looked at her. He told her that there was nowhere more important. Those words stayed with her. At the hospital, Jae-hyun refused to leave the waiting room. He sat beside Soraya through every consultation. He listened to every explanation from the doctor. He asked questions. He took notes. And when the doctor mentioned that Soraya might experience weakness during recovery, Jae-hyun immediately began making arrangements. But Soraya noticed something else. He was shaking. Very slightly. Almost imperceptibly. She realized he was more frightened than she was. That evening, they returned to the mansion together. For the first time in years, they ate dinner at the same table without the usual silence between them. Jae-hyun asked her about her childhood. Soraya smiled and told him stories he had never heard. He listened. Really listened. Then she asked him why he had married her. The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his plate. For years, he had avoided answering it. But tonight, he finally told her the truth. He had married her because she was the first person who looked at him without fear. Soraya became quiet. He explained that everyone around him wanted something. Power. Money. Protection. Influence. But she had once looked at him and simply asked whether he had eaten. That small question had stayed with him. He had loved her long before he understood what love meant. Soraya smiled through tears. But just when the distance between them finally began to disappear, Jae-hyun received a phone call. His expression changed. The warmth vanished from his face. He listened silently. Then his eyes moved towards Soraya. Someone had been asking questions about her medical records. Someone outside the family knew about her condition. And whoever it was had been trying to contact the hospital before Jae-hyun arrived. The peaceful night suddenly felt different. Danger was not approaching with violence. It was approaching through secrets. Jae-hyun ended the call and stood. Soraya asked what had happened. He did not want to frighten her. But he also refused to lie to her again. He told her that someone had accessed information they should never have been able to see. Soraya immediately remembered the photograph she had discovered in his study. The mysterious woman beside him. The old envelope. The strange feeling that someone had been hiding something from her. She suddenly wondered whether the medical report was the only secret inside their marriage. Then Jae-hyun noticed the fear in her eyes. He realized she was thinking about something else. He asked what she had found in his study. Soraya froze. She had never told him. And now she knew that whatever was inside that old photograph was connected to a part of his life he had deliberately kept hidden. She slowly told him about the woman in the photograph. Jae-hyun went completely still. Because that woman was not his former lover. She was his sister. And she was the reason Jae-hyun had spent years building an empire strong enough to protect his family. But there was something Soraya did not know. His sister had died years ago after trusting the wrong person. And the man responsible had recently returned to Seoul. Jae-hyun looked toward the dark windows of the mansion. Someone had been watching them. Someone knew about Soraya. And now that Jae-hyun had finally opened his heart to his wife, The person who knew his greatest weakness had discovered exactly where to strike. But what Jae-hyun did next would force Surya to confront a truth even more painful than her medical diagnosis. The next morning, Surya woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, she forgot everything. She looked beside her and saw Jae-hyun sleeping. The sight surprised her. He had stayed beside her all night. Not in his usual room. Not behind a closed office door. He had simply remained there, holding her hand until exhaustion finally took over. Surya watched him quietly. The man beside her was feared by thousands of people, yet there was something almost vulnerable about him when he slept. She gently reached toward his face. Before her fingers touched him, his eyes opened. He had always been a light sleeper. Jae-hyun looked at her and immediately noticed the sadness in her expression. He asked whether she had slept well. She nodded. But neither of them mentioned the phone call from the previous night. Both knew something had changed. Someone had accessed her medical information, and Jae-hyun had no intention of allowing that person to get any closer. Later that morning, Jae-hyun quietly instructed his most trusted security team to investigate the breach. He did not tell Surya everything. He only told her that the hospital records would be protected and that she had nothing to fear. But Surya could see the tension in his face. She knew her husband. Whenever Jae-hyun became that quiet, something serious was happening. Still, she decided not to push him. Instead, she focused on something she had wanted to do for years. She wanted to make breakfast for him. It was a simple thing. But she remembered how Jae-hyun had once told her that his mother used to prepare breakfast for him before school. His mother had been one of the few people who could make him smile. After she died, those mornings disappeared. Surya wanted to bring one of them back. When Jae-hyun entered the kitchen, he stopped. The table was already prepared. Surya stood near the stove wearing a simple robe, quietly preparing his favorite meal. He stared at her. She turned around and smiled. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jae-hyun walked toward her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin gently against her shoulder. Surya froze. It was such a small gesture. But coming from him, it meant everything. She leaned against him. And for the first time since their wedding, the mansion felt like a home. But peace never lasted long around Jae-hyun. That afternoon, one of his senior executives arrived with information that made his expression darken. The person who accessed Surya medical records had not hacked the hospital. They had used an internal authorization. Someone with access to Jae-hyun private network had requested the information. That meant the person was close. Very close. Jae-hyun immediately began reviewing everyone who worked around him. But then something unexpected appeared. The request had been made using an authorization code belonging to his late sister. Jae-hyun stared at the screen. That was impossible. Her access had been permanently disabled years ago, unless someone had deliberately restored it. He immediately remembered the photograph Surya had discovered. The woman in the picture was his sister, Yuna. She had been the person Jae-hyun trusted most before her death. Years ago, Yuna had discovered that someone inside their family was secretly selling company information. She had planned to expose the person, but she never got the chance. Her death had been ruled an accident. Jae-hyun had never accepted that explanation. He had spent years searching for the truth. And now the same authorization code had appeared again. Someone wanted him to remember. That evening, Jae-hyun returned home earlier than usual. Surya was sitting in the living room reading. She looked up and immediately knew something was wrong. He sat beside her. Then he told her about Yuna. For the first time, he opened the door to the darkest part of his past. He told Surya that his sister had been the only family member he completely trusted. He told her about the night she died. He told her about the investigation. And he admitted that he had never stopped believing that her death was connected to someone inside his own circle. Surya listened without interrupting. Then she placed her hand over his. She told him that he did not have to carry the past alone anymore. Jae-hyun looked at her. Those words affected him more than she realized. He had spent years believing that love made people weak. Now he was beginning to understand that love could also give someone the courage to keep going. That night, they sat together on the balcony. Surya rested her head against his shoulder. Jae-hyun held her hand. Neither needed to speak. But then Surya suddenly remembered something. The envelope. The original medical envelope had contained a second sheet. She had forgotten about it. She quickly went upstairs and returned with the paper. Jae-hyun read it. His expression changed. The doctor had written a note explaining that Surya's medical condition might have been connected to an earlier medication she had unknowingly been given. The medicine itself was not dangerous, but someone had prescribed it without telling her the full reason. Jae-hyun immediately realized the significance. The medication had been given to Surya months earlier during a routine health consultation arranged by someone from his household. He looked at her. Surya suddenly understood what he was thinking. Someone had been involved in her medical treatment before they even knew there was a problem. The discovery did not mean someone had intentionally harmed her, but it meant somebody had been interfering with her private medical decisions. And that person had access to the mansion. Jae-hyun wanted Surya to leave the house temporarily. She refused. Not because she was fearless, because she was tired of being protected through silence. She told him that if they were going to survive whatever was happening, they had to face it together. Jae-hyun looked at her for a long moment. Then he agreed. It was the first time he had allowed his wife into a part of his world he had always kept locked away. Together, they reviewed the household records. They discovered that one staff member had accessed Surya's medical information repeatedly. The person was an older housekeeper named Mrs. Han. Surya immediately defended her. Mrs. Han had worked in the mansion since before their wedding. She had always treated Surya like a daughter. Jae-hyun knew that. But the records were undeniable. Before they could question her, Mrs. Han approached them herself. She looked terrified. She confessed that she had accessed the medical information. Surya's eyes filled with shock. But Mrs. Han quickly explained that she had not been trying to hurt her. She had been following instructions from someone she believed was protecting Jae-hyun. Then she revealed the name. Jae-hyun went completely silent. It was someone he had trusted for years. His own uncle. The same man who had advised him after Yuna died. The same man who had helped him build his empire. The same man who had always told him that emotions were a weakness. Surya looked at Jae-hyun. For the first time, she saw something dangerous in his eyes. Not rage. Not hatred. Betrayal. But Mrs. Han was not finished. She revealed that Jae-hyun's uncle had known about Surya's medical condition before Jae-hyun did. He had been collecting information about her for months. And there was one final detail that made Surya's heart stop. The uncle had never wanted to hurt her. He wanted Jae-hyun to believe that Surya was hiding something from him. He wanted to destroy the trust between them. Because if Jae-hyun ever trusted his wife completely, the uncle knew he would lose control over him. Suddenly, the tears in the kitchen made sense. The distance between them made sense. The old photograph made sense. Someone had been quietly feeding their marriage with doubt, and they had almost succeeded. Jae-hyun turned towards Surya. He realized that the greatest danger had not been outside their home. It had been inside their marriage. But instead of allowing fear to divide them, he made a decision. He would expose the truth without turning Surya into a pawn. And for the first time, Surya understood that her husband was not simply protecting her. He was choosing her. But what neither of them knew was that the final piece of Yuna's death had already been found. And when Jae-hyun saw it, he would finally understand why his uncle had been so desperate to keep him from asking questions. Jae-hyun did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his study with the old photograph of Yuna in front of him. For years, he had believed that his sister had died because she had trusted the wrong person. Now he understood that the truth was more complicated. His uncle had spent years manipulating him. Not by attacking him directly, by controlling what he believed. Every time Jae-hyun became close to discovering the truth, someone had given him another explanation. Every time he questioned Yuna's death, his uncle had reminded him that revenge would only destroy the family. And every time Jae-hyun became emotionally attached to someone, his uncle had warned him that love would make him weak. Then Surya entered his life. And suddenly, his uncle had a new problem. Jae-hyun had found someone he trusted more than himself. The next morning, Jae-hyun asked his uncle to come to the mansion. He did not accuse him. He did not threaten him. He simply invited him to sit down for breakfast. His uncle arrived confident and calm. He had no idea that Jae-hyun already knew about the medical records. He began speaking about business. Jae-hyun listened. Then he placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of every unauthorized request connected to Surya medical records. His uncle looked at them. For the first time, his confidence disappeared. Jae-hyun asked why he had done it. His uncle remained silent. Then he finally admitted the truth. He had never wanted Surya dead. He had wanted Jae-hyun to distrust her. He believed that if Jae-hyun became emotionally dependent on his wife, he would eventually give her influence over the company. That was unacceptable to him. He had spent years believing that Jae-hyun needed someone ruthless beside him, someone who would never challenge his decisions. Surya had done the opposite. She had taught Jae-hyun to listen, to forgive, to slow down, to care about people instead of simply controlling them. His uncle considered that weakness, but Jae-hyun considered it the greatest change in his life. Then came the final revelation. Jae-hyun showed him a document recovered from Yoon's personal files. It contained evidence that Yoon had discovered the uncle had been secretly manipulating company accounts. She had planned to expose him. The uncle admitted that he had tried to stop her, but he insisted that he never intended for her to die. The accident had happened during an argument. He had panicked. Then he had spent years hiding the truth. Jae-hyun closed his eyes. The truth he had searched for had finally arrived. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like grief. His sister was still gone. No confession could bring her back. No revenge could restore the years he had lost. For a moment, the old Jae-hyun wanted to punish everyone involved. But then he remembered Surya. He remembered her sitting alone on the kitchen floor. He remembered her tears. He remembered how she had hidden her pain because she believed he had enough problems already. And he realized he did not want to become the man his uncle believed he was. He wanted to become the husband Surya needed. So Jae-hyun turned the evidence over to the authorities and removed his uncle from the company. He refused to destroy him out of anger. He chose accountability instead. When Surya learned what had happened, she was relieved. But there was one thing still troubling her. She asked Jae-hyun whether he regretted marrying her. He looked genuinely surprised. He asked why she would ever think that. She told him that their marriage had started with distance, secrets, silence, and fear. She wondered whether all the pain had been worth it. Jae-hyun walked toward her. He took her hands. Then he told her something he had never said clearly before. The best decision of his life had been marrying her. Surya began crying. But this time, her tears were different. They were tears of relief. Jae-hyun gently wiped them away. He told her that he had spent years believing that protecting someone meant keeping them away from danger. Now he understood that sometimes protecting someone meant trusting them enough to stand beside you. Surya smiled. She told him she had never needed a perfect husband. She only needed an honest one. Those words broke through whatever remained of his emotional walls. Jae-hyun pulled her into his arms. And for the first time, he told her that he loved her. Not indirectly. Not through expensive gifts. Not through silent protection. He said it plainly. He loved her. Surya held him tightly. Then she reminded him that she still had a medical procedure ahead. Jae-hyun smiled softly. He told her that he would be there for every appointment. Every difficult morning. Every night when she was afraid. He would be there. And this time, he kept his promise. The months that followed changed their marriage completely. Surya received treatment and gradually regained her strength. Jae-hyun changed too. He still remained powerful, still intimidating, still respected throughout Seoul. But inside his home, he became different. He learned to come home earlier. He learned to ask how Surya's day had been. He learned to listen before offering solutions. Sometimes they cooked together late at night. Sometimes they sat on the balcony drinking tea. And sometimes Surya would tease him about the terrifying reputation he had outside the mansion. Jae-hyun would simply smile. One evening, months after the night everything changed, Surya returned to the kitchen. It was 12:47 a.m. The same time. The same kitchen. The same quiet mansion. She stood there preparing tea. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around. Jae-hyun was standing in the doorway. He looked at the clock. Then at her. For a second, memories of that terrible night returned. But this time, Surya was smiling. Jae-hyun walked toward her. He gently took the cup from her hand and placed it on the counter. Then he asked whether she was okay. Surya nodded. She told him she was happy. Jae-hyun smiled. He reminded her that the last time he found her in the kitchen at midnight, she was crying. She laughed softly. Then she told him that the woman who had cried that night had been afraid that love would eventually leave her. Jae-hyun held her close. He told her that she would never have to wonder again, because he was staying. And that was when Suraya finally understood the real meaning behind that midnight conversation. The secret had not destroyed their marriage. It had saved it. Her tears had forced Jae-hyun to ask the question he should have asked years earlier. Why are you hurting? And his willingness to listen had given them both a second chance. Their love had not been built on money. It had not survived because of power. It survived because two people finally stopped hiding their pain from each other. Jae-hyun had once believed that being strong meant never showing weakness. Suraya taught him that real strength could look like vulnerability. And Suraya had once believed that she had to carry every burden alone. Jae-hyun taught her that love meant allowing someone to carry it with you. Years later, whenever Suraya woke in the middle of the night, she would sometimes find Jae-hyun beside her. And if she went to the kitchen, he would follow. Not because he feared losing control, but because he never wanted her to cry alone again. Their marriage had begun with secrets, but it survived because they finally chose honesty. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of their story. Love is not always about finding someone who can protect you from the world. Sometimes, it is finding someone who notices when you are hurting, sits beside you in the darkness, and finally asks why. If you made it this far, let us know where you are watching from, and comment your favorite moment below, like this video, and subscribe to @Physial_Threads for more emotional Mafia love stories.